All right, Baltimore City Council, Ways and Means Committee, we are here for Council Bill 22-0235, Ordinance of Estimates for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2023. I'm Eric Costello, Councilman for the 11th District, Chair of the committee, joined to my far right by Councilwoman Danny McCray, 2nd District, member of the committee, Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, member of the committee, and Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District, member of the committee. To my immediate right is Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. We're also joined by Nina Themlis on behalf of Mayor Brandon Scott and Matt Stegman on behalf of Council President Nick Mosby. And to my immediate right is Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. With that, we are here for our first session. The City Administrator's Office, Chris Shorter, Mr. CAO, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, honorable members of the Ways and Means Committee. I am honored to provide remarks and testimony in reference to fiscal year 2023, the budget on behalf of the Office of the Mayor. My name is Chris Shorter, and I have the privilege of serving as the City Administrator for the City of Baltimore. I would like to start by thanking the Mayor for his steadfast leadership and for the faith and confidence he has in me, and by acknowledging my colleagues within the City Administrator's Office and express my sincere appreciation for their continued leadership and strong support of our government. Deputy City Administrator Chichi Nyaganash, Deputy Mayor for Equity, Health, and Human Services Faith Leach, and Deputy Mayor for Community and Economic Development, Ted Carter. I would also like to acknowledge Ari Giles for his direct day-to-day support of me and his leadership coordinating the Mayor's action plan and government transformation work. As we convene over the next few days to discuss the budget for next year, I would be remiss if I didn't also pause to acknowledge the tremendous effort that our workforce has engaged in over the past year and beyond during such a mentally and emotionally exhausting time. Their efforts have allowed our government to remain open through the height of the pandemic and continue to deliver services as we have returned to a more regular posture. Even now, as cases rise locally and nationally, it reminds us that we are still in the midst of COVID-19, which has been a persistent threat to the health of our city and our workforce. Besides the health and economic impact of the pandemic, we are also confronting the other economic realities, such as rising inflation, labor shortages, and conflicts abroad, which have downstream impacts on our local economy. Despite these larger issues at play, the Scott administration is proud to present a total local budget in the amount of $4.03 billion. This budget represents a historic investment in city schools, continues the response to COVID-19, and leverages federal recovery funds to make Baltimore safer, healthier, cleaner, and more equitable. During my remarks this morning, I plan to first highlight the structure of the City Administrator's Office and describe how the office is staffed. I will then move into a summary of the mayoral pillars and highlight some of the investments we are making in each pillar, as well as the FY2023 investment in the mayor's office itself. Finally, I will discuss our strategic approach to transformation management and government coordination, then close and answer any questions you may have. There you go. The City Council established the position of Chief Administrative Officer as the city's Chief Administrative Officer in August of 2020 by charter amendment ratified by Baltimore City voters on November 3rd of 2020. The position of Chief Administrative Officer was established to provide additional professional management capacity to support the day-to-day operations of our government and to advise the mayor on the effective, efficient, and economically prudent administration of resources and execution of policy decisions. The City Administrator's Office is comprised of the Deputy City Administrator and 3 Deputy Mayors: Public Safety, Equity, Health, and Human Services, and Community and Economic Development. The Deputy City Administrator supports 7 agencies, including the Department of Public Works, General Services, Information Technology, Transportation, and the Environmental Control Board, among others. The Deputy Mayor for Public Safety supports 4 primary agencies, including the Baltimore Police Department, Fire Department, Neighborhood Safety and Engagement in the Office of Emergency Management, and is the primary liaison for the Sheriff's Office, State's Attorney's Office, Circuit Court, District Court, and the Orphans Court of Baltimore. The Deputy Mayor for Community and Economic Development provides direct support to 5 agencies, including Planning, Housing, Community Development, Employment Development, Municipal and Zoning Appeals, and is the primary liaison to the Baltimore Development Corp, Visit Baltimore, the Housing Authority, our Office of Promotion and the Arts, Live Baltimore, and the Convention Center. The Deputy Mayor for Equity, Health, and Human Services directly supports 6 agencies, including the Baltimore City Health Department, Recreation and Parks, Children and Family Success, African American Male Engagement, Homeless Services, and Immigrant Affairs, and is the primary liaison to the Enoch Pratt Library System, the Baltimore Public School System, the Department of Social Services, Family League of Baltimore, and the Civic Fund. In addition to the Deputy City Administrator and Deputy Mayors, I also directly support 9 other agencies and offices, including the Department of Human Resources, Department of Finance, our Office of Performance and Innovation, the Office of Recovery Programs, the Chief Data Officer, the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, and the Employee Recruitment Systems, as well as the Mayor's Office of Broadband and Digital Equity. As you know, the Scott administration has organized the strategic direction of our city government and the policies we wish to achieve into 5 core pillars. As part of the budget development process, we have reinforced the commitment to these organizing themes by requiring agencies and budget review teams to organize the submission and review of the budget in alignment with the 5 pillars and the associated goals and actions. For the benefit of the public, the Mayor's action plan is organized around these pillars, which are prioritizing youth, building public safety, clean and healthy communities, equitable neighborhood development, and responsible stewardship of city resources. Each pillar features several sub-goals, and each goal is composed of multiple actions. Now, the pillars, goals, and actions in the plan served as organizing principles throughout the budget development process. The priorities in these pillars have helped us to prioritize the allocation of scarce resources to ensure that the administration's priorities are properly resourced and aligned with the administration's goals. I'll now briefly highlight budget investments for each of the 5 pillars quickly. The FY2023 budget for prioritizing young people represents an investment of approximately $563 million. Of that investment, $332.8 million has been allocated towards a historic investment in city schools to meet the city's local share requirement of the Kerwin legislation. This pillar also features $41 million in ARPA funding toward capital projects at the recreation parks, pools, trails, and fields across the city of Baltimore. This pillar also features an investment into the Apprenticeship Maryland program, which will help develop a pipeline of local talent from schools into the Baltimore City Fire Department through internships. The Department for Building Public Safety. The Department of Transportation has rolled out, as you all know, 2 new speed cameras on I-83 to improve safety and reduce accidents on the highway. The first year revenues are estimated at $34.7 million, with proceeds first covering program administrative costs and the remaining revenue solely focused on the I-83 corridor and improvements. The Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement will spend $20.7 million of ARPA funds on a variety of crime prevention programs with a focus on group violence reduction, the group violence reduction strategy, reentry services, victim services, and youth and trauma services. The Baltimore Police Department will also add 9 positions to directly support MONSE's GVRS work. The Baltimore City Fire Department has received approval to enter the Emergency Services Payment Program, which will provide an estimated $40 million of annual reimbursement from Medicaid for eligible ambulance transports. This budget also allocates funding to the recruitment and retention efforts associated with the most recent FOP contract. Specifically, $15 million of new funding is dedicated to support various incentives for hard-to-fill shifts, education, field training, and patrol work. The proposed budget plan also includes $897.3 million across all funding sources, for clean and healthy communities. Key highlights include the Baltimore City Health Department, which will leverage $26.2 million from ARPA to continue the response to COVID-19 through continued contact tracing and vaccination efforts, purchasing personal protective equipment and ongoing testing efforts. These funds will be critical as eligibility for federal funds begins to expire. Fiscal year 2023 will mark the first year of a $90 million ARPA and U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development funds investment to combat homelessness in Baltimore. Funding will be used by the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services for rental assistance, case management services, and the addition of permanent supportive housing options for those residents experiencing homelessness. The Department of Planning will add a resilience planning position to support the new sustainability subcabinet. The position will elevate options for better preparing the community for extreme heat, flooding, and other hazards. The preliminary budget plan includes $334.6 million across all funding sources associated with equitable neighborhood development. Key highlights for this pillar include the Office of Equity, Civil Rights, adding 2 positions to support the development of ongoing equity training and fulfilling the requirement of the city's equity assessment program. The Minority and Women's Business Opportunity Office will add 5 positions to support enhanced compliance and enforcement of the city's IMBU laws. These positions will also focus on expanding the number of certified vendors and increasing the city's expenditure with minority and women-owned businesses. In FY23, the Department of Housing and Community Development will receive a $100 million ARPA award, as you all know, which will, we believe, will have a transformational impact through the development of new affordable housing, support for low-income renters and homeowners, and by addressing vacant housing in alignment with the work of the Vacant Working Group. And finally, for the pillars, the FY23 budget continues to fund the implementation of the Workday system. The 2023 budget has committed $13.7 million to implement the final phase of the Enterprise Resource Planning Migration Initiative. BCIT will add 5 new cybersecurity positions to support the monitoring and updating of the software security patches, as well as the ongoing monitoring and mitigation of any outstanding or emerging software vulnerabilities. The city will continue to identify savings from the post-COVID work environment. DGS will purchase a new energy management software system, which will allow us to better track and identify savings opportunities from energy efficiency strategies. In terms of the Mayor's Office budget, highlights, the fiscal year 2023 budget calls for the Mayor's Office, a Mayor's Office budget of $17.6 million. A couple of major highlights I would like to mention today are the addition of 5 operations director level positions and 1 executive role for an infrastructure czar. The operations director positions will provide strategy, policy, and operations support for the deputy mayors and deputy city administrator, and I. The infrastructure czar, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, will serve as an executive role who will report directly to me and be responsible for overseeing the coordination, administration, and management of the federal infrastructure and investment jobs funds. This work will be supported by a new Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development. Now that we have discussed the highlights of the FY23 budget, I would like to shift gears and talk about the structure and processes that are in place or being built to support the execution of the work plans that are being presented in today's budget hearings and in the subsequent budget hearings in the days to come. My office was created in order to help shift the culture of our government by advocating for operational excellence, leading practices, and improved coordination. One approach that I have championed and seen in other governments is the use of transformation management as a concept to shift our culture to one of enhanced accountability, transparency, and predictability. Transformation management is an approach to strategic management focused on a standardized and systematic method of managing change. There are two primary responsibilities of a transformation management office in this approach. The first responsibility is to create and prioritize and select actions that have a clear public benefit and align to the city's needs and priorities. The second is to mobilize resources to execute action plans and ensure transformation outcomes are achieved. This transformation management program is governed by an executive steering committee that meets monthly to review progress on the mayor's execution of the mayor's action plan and associated transformation initiatives. Since the mayor's action plan was published in December, agencies have met across all 5 pillars to clearly articulate financial plans, resource demands, risk statements, and work plans for actions in the action plan as part of the transformation management effort. Now, agencies have begun providing status updates that are then reviewed and annualized or analyzed by the steering committee for follow-up and decisions monthly, again, at that steering committee meeting. This TMO structure, as you could see on the slide, is a new approach and a necessary investment to help the city exercise new collaboration and project management techniques. It aligns accountability and clarity and contributes to some of the shifts in culture that we are championing within the administration. Another means of establishing accountability and improving service quality will be central to our work supporting city agencies is performance management and the use of data. There you go. In FY23, our city stat team will continue to deliver police stat, clean stat, while beginning a newly envisioned youth stat. They will also support other data and performance-related initiatives, such as the late invoice payment stat, where we host monthly deep dives into vendor payment and invoicing trends and issues, as well as a procurement stat. I'm excited to announce that we will also be embarking on the development of a robust agency planning, performance planning process and support the development of the technology solutions to centrally host this performance data. As I draw towards the conclusion of my prepared remarks, I would like to highlight a few more key initiatives of note for FY23. The Workday migration. As many of you know, the City of Baltimore government is currently undergoing a transformational automation process connecting all the city's business and administrative processes such as human capital management and financial management and accounting, procurement, grants management, and many more into one enterprise planning system, Workday. Phase 1 of the migration was completed between October and December of 2021. This migration we all know very well, and it included human capital management, compensation, benefits, absence, and time tracking and payroll. Phase 2 migration is scheduled to occur in early FY2023 and includes all our financial accounting, budgets, banking and settlement, customer and supplier accounts, procurement, grants management systems. The final phase 3 migration, is scheduled in December of this year and includes our budget management, recruiting, performance, learning, and talent management systems. This is an enormous leap forward for Baltimore City government and will streamline many of the dated systems that hold us back from excellence in government service. Procurement reform. We also went through a competitive procurement process, as many of you know, and selected Civic Initiatives LLC to lead a comprehensive citywide review of our procurement system. The vendor has been charged with developing a strategic procurement transformation roadmap that aligns with national and government procurement best practice. The review consists of 4 phases: current procurement state, desired state, a gap analysis and needs assessment, and then finally a transformation roadmap. The project includes reviews of our procurement code, policy and procedures, technology systems, and administrative processes. Interviews are being conducted with the vendor community, MBEWBEs, agency heads, agency staff, council members, administration, mayor, and the staff within the mayor's office, BOE board members, and other stakeholders. Interviews with stakeholders began in June and will conclude in August of this year. An infrastructure czar, as mentioned earlier in my remarks, the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was signed into law by President Joe Biden on November 15th of 2021. A once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure and its competitiveness, the infrastructure law is intended to rebuild America's roads, bridges, and rails and expand access to clean drinking water, ensure every American has access to high-speed internet, and tackle climate crisis, advance environmental justice, and invest in communities that have too often been left behind. The opportunity for the city could be transformational. The funding can be leveraged to speed up projects that are already underway or being planned, from bridges, water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure to bike lanes. The city of Baltimore must act quickly to strengthen our local capacity to ensure every dollar flowing into the city is utilized for the highest and best need and to produce the most significant improvement in our infrastructure. Our government's capacity to effectively apply for, be awarded, and administer infrastructure funds are strained due to the pandemic, challenges with the procurement process, supply chain issues, and the need to account for heightened cybersecurity requirements. For some of our agencies, this will also be the first time applying for funds from a suite of federal agencies competitively in this manner in decades. In response, the mayor will establish an Office of Infrastructure Development responsible for providing coordination and support to agency leaders focused on identifying, administering, and managing federal infrastructure projects and grant programs. The office will play the lead role in advising Baltimore City government agencies on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, grant application process, development process, regulations, and systems that impact the program. Multi-agency coordinated inspections. As many of you know, the city has a very successful model for multi-agency inspections of bars, restaurants, liquor stores called the Social Club Task Force. DHCD, the Liquor Board, Health, BPD, all do targeted enforcement in nuisance properties where multiple 311 or 911 calls have occurred. Because of the volume of work, the limitations on the types of properties enforced, the Social Club Task Force primarily focuses in on downtown where liquor licenses and restaurants are located. No such coordinated approach exists for residential or commercial properties that do not have a food or liquor license. Councilman Cohen and Councilman Burnett had several sessions with the administration, and thanks to their leadership, in September of 2021, representatives from several city agencies, including OPI, Health, BPD, Fire, DHCD, Transportation, and the Liquor Board, began meeting on a weekly basis to review properties where multiple email accounts, phone numbers, or names have complained about a specific property, including properties that have multiple 311 calls after having an open service request. Since the group's first meeting, we have reviewed 219 properties. 27% of those 219 had multiple agencies respond, which is the exact reason to have the task force work, where multiple agencies need to respond to a property. District 9 had the most nuisance properties, 40, and that was followed closely by District 1, 35. We will continue that work and continue those weekly meetings, and my hope is that the agencies will continue to work together in a much more seamless way. And then the vacant housing work group. On Monday, as you all know, on Monday, January 31st, 2022, the mayor provided an internal review directive to all city agencies. This directive pulled agencies together to assess all operations, procedures, and processes connected to city government and how it manages private and publicly owned vacant properties. As you know, this work group developed a list of recommendations, conducted weekly in-depth meetings, and met with internal and external stakeholders. The list of recommendations have been made public, and we have now transitioned that work group from research and planning into a multi-agency action and implementation group. I'm very thankful to the teams at DHCD, Law, the Department of Public Works, Finance, and others. The group has created a project management, The group has created a project management tool. That tool is now being used essentially via Microsoft Project Management to track all of the actions associated with the working group recommendations. We've divided those actions into 3, 6, 9, 1, and 2-year goals. Those goals are now, when we have our biweekly calls, tracked very thoughtfully and thoroughly in the system. So it is no longer random. We are focused on the 3 and 6 month goals right now as a group. And again, I am very proud of the leadership of DHCD, in particular, Kimberly Rubens, and her work facilitating those calls and helping to make sure that that system is updated by everyone involved, all agencies that have some role to play in terms of tracked goals. These are just a sampling of some of the reform efforts. There are many others that we are working on in the mayor's office, but we'll stop here and thank you again, Chairman, for the opportunity to provide remarks to open up the FY23 budget hearing week and a half, and I am available for any questions that you or your colleagues may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shorter. We've also been joined by Councilman Mark Conway, 4th District, Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee, Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, member of the committee, and Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District. First question, you mentioned someone named Ari Giles, I think. I'm not familiar with the name. Can you just share who that is and what that person's role is?
Sure. Ari Giles is a special assistant to the city administrator and supports me very directly, providing all kinds of, support to that a special assistant would provide. He is also helping to lead and facilitate the work around the mayor's action plan and a lot of the work that we're doing around government reform and transformation. That office, that TMO model that I mentioned in my remarks.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Shorter, the mayor has publicly indicated that time of residence in the city impacts one's ability to be able to comment on city conditions. How long have you been in Baltimore City?
I landed last year on January 9th of 2021 and live in Reservoir Hill.
Thank you. And has your time of residency in the city impacted how you execute your job or your job performance?
I think it certainly helps that I do not take for granted that Baltimore City is a place with unique character and that getting to know residents and communities is critically important. So while yes, I have had some success in other cities and managing municipal governments in other cities, it does not necessarily equate to success here. So it has really been important for me to get to know community, to get to know the programs and services that our government provides, and to get to know our workforce. I don't think I would be effective in this role otherwise.
Thank you. Colleagues, a couple quick housekeeping items. If you have questions, you don't have to do the slip, but if you want to, that's fine. Just get my attention. I'll put you on the queue or let Marguerite know. Right now we have Councilman Schleifer and then Councilwoman McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, City Administrator, for your service. Even if you are new to the city, we welcome you.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the work you're doing on our behalf. First question I have is, we know that one of the things that you've been very active on since you got here is dealing with the procurement-related issues, which especially our vendors, but the rest of us are also very familiar with. There's a piece of legislation right now in before the City Council, sponsored by the Comptroller, to remove some of that function away from, I guess, under the mayor's control to the Comptroller's control. And so is that something that you and your office supports?
Yes, actually, we've been working very closely with the Comptroller's office. These are conversations that he has been having very directly with us and with the mayor. And so this is coming with the mayor's support. This is a change to the reporting relationship of our payroll system. So the payroll accounting portion of BAPS would be under this legislation transferred to the responsibility of the Comptroller.
Thank you. And my second question is in the budget book, page 354, we can see pretty clearly that the mayor's office budget is doubling, and I obviously read the notes, so I understand why that is and how positions are being, consolidated, et cetera. But meanwhile, at the same time, the city council budget is, just having a standard basic increase. And so with the 2023 proposed budget, the mayor's office now has more positions than all 14 city council districts, plus the council president's office and all the city council support staff combined. And so certainly that is a big shift from the way things have been in the past. And so with all that going on and the fact that we this year do not have the same luxury to take positions from other places that we think would be better served under the city council, is there a way that with this increase that the mayor's office is willing to take on certain increased responsibilities, especially ones that are directly tied to agencies that they control, that the city council can order to do certain things? And the two requests on that I would have, and I'm curious to see if you're interested in taking this on, is involving two key items. Number one is water billing, and number two is solid waste issues, recycling, trash collection, et cetera. Is anybody of those 86 positions for 2023 willing to take on and be the lead person on that? So when those complaints come to the city council, we can at least divert them directly to one person that works for the mayor that has the ability to get those issues resolved, to alleviate some of the high call volume that we have that we're not receiving additional staffing to support.
Yeah, I appreciate those questions, Councilman. I can't speak to the history of the staff breakdown associated for city council versus the mayor's office. I will say that we are called on to do much better coordination in our city. Our agencies do a fantastic job for their mission and their scope in many cases. But what is not happening is the cross-enterprise coordination. And so certainly in order for the mayor's office to do to provide that kind of leadership, we need more than just a skeleton crew. In terms of the DPW questions around wastewater and billing, what I would maybe suggest, and I'll certainly be here during the DPW hearing, is for DPW to address a point of contact for council, and if that response is not sufficient, then I'll certainly be here to add to or supplement the director's response. Things have taken a really positive turn at DPW, and especially around water billing issues. I know that when I first got to Baltimore City, that was one of the first conversations the mayor had with me, even before I got to Baltimore City, and that is water billing. And I will say that the agency has taken a pretty aggressive approach to water billing as an issue, and have corrected a lot of the systems, certainly a lot of work still to do associated with water billing. And so look forward to hearing from them as a response to that question. And again, we'll be here to supplement it if needed.
So just to provide some of the history on that, so a couple of years ago that commitment was made, and there was a point person assigned. We have a specific email address that council is supposed to email when receiving water billing complaints, and it's supposed to go to management. What I've seen ever since that's been created is that it really just depends on the day. So some days you always get a response. You always get a response saying we will work on it. Whether or not they work on it depends on the day, the week, or the month. And so water billing issues continue to still be very problematic and not addressed in short order. And when we look at the city charter and we actually look at the roles and responsibilities, clearly we see that there's a very strong mayoral system in Baltimore City, and the mayor has a lot of responsibilities, and we appreciate the work that's being done. But at the same time, the DPW is an agency that you guys have the ability to go and get stuff from. When the city council wants something to be dealt with from DPW, for instance, asking a couple simple questions, we can wait as long as 3 months to get an answer, even with sending weekly reminders. And so that's why I feel that within the budget here, having 86 positions under the mayor, it is the mayor's office's responsibility when somebody's having an issue with an agency that they be the one to deal with it. The city council is a legislative body, but we spend probably 99% of our time on constituent issues, which we like doing because we like interfacing with our constituents. But that's only when the agencies have enough respect for the city council that they yield, and decide to respond and address those issues. And so without, the mayor's office essentially ordering agencies to respond to the city council the same way they would respond to the mayor, we don't have that ability to get that resolved. So, right now we have two choices. We could forward the emails over to the mayor's office, and then our constituents just won't get any response or get their issues dealt with. Or we can have somebody assigned of these 86 people to say, look, we understand water billing continues to be a big issue, so let's alleviate that, at least that piece, from the city council, because the city council is basically doing doing the mayor's office. We're doing this work that you guys haven't empowered us to have your agencies respond, and so I think it's really behooves you guys to take that on. And to set somebody in the mayor's office to do that when creating new positions, and I see there are some new positions being created. A lot of that stuff is like new initiatives, new programs. We're not even getting the basic functions done. We're not getting our recycling picked up every week. You know, we're not getting we're not getting consistent, accurate water bills every month. And so I just really think that that's something that this committee deserves to hear back on is having somebody who's willing to take those items on.
No, again, I definitely appreciate the sentiment. What I'll say is that ideally our agencies are staffed and empowered to do the job, and that we're not doing it for them. That you are not doing it for them in your office, and that we are not doing it for them in the mayor's office. Our agency have phenomenal leaders and committed staff, and when there is a failure to communicate and you're not getting the response you need, I want to be able to look to the director or the commissioner and get that resolved, not do it myself or have someone else in the mayor's office do it. And so really want to encourage this conversation to happen at the DPW level. And again, we'll be here to help supplement if any specific issue isn't responded to during the hearing.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. And Mr. Shorter, I think we can, just knowing that you'll be here for the DPW conversation, because there are some widespread concerns around both the water billing issue and the recycling collection issue. That would be very helpful, just so that we can get to the bottom of that. Councilwoman McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Within your presentation, you mentioned multiple items, including steering committees, quarterly reviews of agencies to assist with gauging city agencies' progress against goals. Has your office developed performance and accountability plans for each agency?
Thank you for that question. So when we say, and when I've said that we're investing in a performance management system, currently we have a very robust city stat process and program. And fortunately, Baltimore City has a history of leading the way nationally around city stat. What we do not currently have is a performance management system, one where we say to agencies, this is based on your mission, these are the activities that you're going to perform each year, and these are the standards at which you're going to provide those services or activities. And this is how we're going to measure that performance. We should and will be building in FY23 a performance management system. This will be led by OPI that actually does just that. What we are doing in terms of transformation management and what I talked about this morning is more focused on the mayor's action plan. A performance management system will be really agency-based and will be based on the agency's mission, core mission, and services. The mayor's action plan is driving change. And so there are very clear priorities that the mayor has laid out, and we are structuring our activity in the mayor's office to drive towards those priorities and goals. In many cases, those are the same goals that agencies should have in their performance plans and should be focused on, but unfortunately that is not always the case. And because we don't have a performance management framework, any framework for measuring and monitoring performance agency by agency, that's very difficult to measure. And so this is why we're going to focus time, energy, and resources in FY23 building just that, a performance management system, not just a city stat program. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. How are we going to be communicating this performance management system that you are putting together in FY23? How will we be communicating that to constituents? What they want to see is how are we gauging success and quality of life for each agency, and other cities are doing fairly well in communicating, say if you go online, an exact performance plan that they can actually see. So what is that going to look like for us once your performance management system is done?
Sure. So first, we will be restarting what was commonplace in Baltimore City a few years ago, the community survey. So we'll be asking residents to tell us about their experience in terms of quality of life issues in Baltimore City in a way that we haven't in years. In terms of the performance management system, every agency will be engaging community around the key performance indicators associated with their performance plan. And so ultimately, when the performance plans go up, and they will certainly be available, made public, the monitoring will happen on a quarterly basis once the system is functioning. The public will be able to actually track and follow along, but those KPIs, the indicators associated with success, should not be developed in a vacuum. And so this is exactly why we have tasked our Office of Performance and Innovation to work with individual agencies to develop goals and objectives, to develop activities, and then to develop key performance indicators. I want to give an example. If we are talking about developing a performance plan for recreation and parks, the expectation is that the Recreation and Parks leadership team, in working with OPI, will be working with their stakeholders to better understand, are these the right objectives? Are these the right goals? Is this the right mission for our agency? Because when the performance plan is complete in FY23, when we have a framework where all of the agencies have clear agency performance plans, those plans should not be foreign to community. The community should have had a part to play in that process for all of the agencies as they develop those plans. Our goal is by the end of FY23 to have a structure of performance plans for each agency. I hope that answers the question.
I have one additional question. I just want to know, how has your office worked with city agencies that have a prevalent aging workforce and or a higher number of eligible retirees to proactively generate succession plans?
Yeah, appreciate that question. So the DHR published a succession plan and was responsible for submitting that plan to council, which I believe they did in the last 45 days. I worked very closely with DHR and reviewed that report before it came to you all. What that means is that DHR will be taking the lead and essentially spearheading conversations and coordinating among agencies. What it also means is that our process of knowledge transfer, that the system that we talked about, Workday, and the training and learning portals associated with Workday become much more important, because we have to track the training that our employees are attending, track the knowledge that is being transferred from one generation to the next. Your question is a very important one, because it is real in many of our agencies that a more than 50% portion of our workforce is retirement eligible. This is certainly not just the case in Baltimore City, but we are very vulnerable to a mass exodus of not just people, but knowledge. And so that succession plan that DHR submitted to council, and the work that needs to be done because of it, is certainly ongoing. What I do is work through DHR to make sure that the HR professionals, those HR advisors within the agencies, are tracking attrition rates, helping to make sure that when we can promote within, we do, helping to make sure that training is happening across the board, not just for technical jobs, but even for those white collar jobs that typically are more, where we feel like we can pull folks from outside the government, we need to promote within, and we do where we can. So just a few things that we're doing to help prepare for what will and could potentially be a pretty large exodus of more experienced employees.
So recently within a DPW oversight hearing, we were able to hear how DPW is looking at a transfer of their knowledge base, how they're going to be proactively going to, say, universities within the city of Baltimore, how they're going to be working with our school system. Are there any other agency-specific highlights regarding succession planning that you would like to speak of at this time?
I could think of about a half a dozen agencies that are actually doing the same in terms of making sure that they are being very strategic in their recruitment efforts. I mentioned earlier sort of the fire department and what they're doing in developing this internship program and funding for that internship program. What I will say is that we are being much more thoughtful about how we and from where we recruit, the incentives that we fund to make sure that we are retaining younger employees. As a government, we are a lot less competitive, and so we may find ourselves, we do, not may, we find ourselves in a situation at the 3 to 5 year mark in some cases where we are very competitive when a professional comes in the door. We are less competitive at the year 3 or year 5 mark because of the promotion ladder and our ability to keep our employees. So we are looking across the board at how we retain, how we recruit, how we incentivize employees, not just at 1 or 2 agencies, but really across the board. There was a classification and compensation, a series of classification and compensation studies. Many of those studies have been published and have been sent to our collective bargaining units where appropriate. Those comp and class studies call for very specific pay increases, and so the administration, the city is really working to make sure that where possible, funding positions at appropriate levels. This is a time we are, as a government, and we share this distinction with many of our other government partners and municipalities, where it is difficult to compete with the private sector. I think about CDL drivers and some of the institutions and sectors that are looking for those drivers, and how hard it is, even when we are training men and women to earn their CDLs ourselves. And what happens after they earn their CDLs, in some cases, at, again, the 3-5 year mark, is that they can go somewhere else, get a signing bonus, and get an hourly pay higher than what we provide. Those are the kinds of strategies those are the kinds of issues, pay and compensation issues, that we have to be able to deal with in the coming years, even though it's going to be a pretty significant hit on our operating budget. Paying our workforce in a competitive way is an issue that we know is really on the horizon for us.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Stokes?
Councilwoman, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a bill I introduced about succession planning, and we're waiting for those agencies to report back. They have not. First of all, I want to thank you and the administration. Last week I was talking about food equity here in the city and how it was cut, and I see that y'all put $11 million back in there. Thank you for that. I guess the community, my big mouth, y'all heard it. My question is, when you came on board, can you name the agencies you're responsible for right now?
Sure. So in addition to the supporting the deputy mayors and the deputy city administrator.
Hang on. Can you bring up the org chart again, too?
Sure.
Just while you're talking through that. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting, gentlemen.
Sure, no problem. This may be very small for the public to see, but I believe you all may have, hopefully you all have copies of this. If not, you see, so in the org chart, you see the three deputy mayors that I support directly, as well as a deputy city administrator. You also see agencies on the other side, our finance department, employee retirement, human resources, our chief equity officer, chief data officer, our recovery office, and broadband and digital equity chief, as well as our Office of Performance and Innovation. And I will likely be adding in the coming weeks the infrastructure development office, or the infrastructures are to that portfolio as well.
The reason why I ask, because and my council colleagues know this, there's been a serious disconnect between the community and city agencies, and our constituents are very frustrated with no follow-up. They don't hear back from an agency. They close a case, just cutting grass. When they call 311, they call back or they tell them it's closed. They don't tell the constituent that it was closed because it went to DBW. They don't tell the constituent when on the phone that we're going out and investigate for 15 days, not go out and cut the grass, and it's still happening. And I've said this a number of times. My other question is, of those agencies you know there's been a problem, have you found out exactly what those problems are, changed them, and see a difference? And can you probably share that information with the council about what agencies particular had, I guess that's disconnect where was no, even, I'm gonna use an example. I should not have a constituent call me because somebody missed recycling. They do 5 311 numbers, nobody pick it up. I call, they go pick it up immediately. That is a serious problem. There should be a relationship between these agencies and our constituent, and it's not there. So again, my question is, all the agencies that you were responsible for, did you actually find out exactly what the disconnect was, and could you report that back to the council, and what changes were made at those agencies to make sure that changes immediately?
Appreciate that. So in the remarks that I provided this morning, a number of examples of key government reform efforts, that is to say, across agency, multi-agency working groups, task forces, or just regular meetings. If I'm involved in a task force or a work group, it is because something either has failed or it involves multiple agencies, and that has to be coordinated. There are many examples of those. I would also say that the power in the STAT program is to do exactly, Councilman, what you just talked about. If there is a problem with a routine service like recycling, pickup, or grass cutting, or grounds maintenance, these are the kinds of things that should come up at a clean STAT, right? And they do. And so we have multiple agencies on the line. Those STAT meetings are very regimented. We are typically looking at very clear service level agreements and statistics associated when we meet those and when we do not. And so many issues are resolved as a part of that process. And what I will say is that I want to give the example of the late invoice concerns that are loud and clear from our community of vendors, nonprofits and private. In March of 2021, we had as a city about $21 or $22 million in outstanding invoice payments. That is to say, invoices that were beyond 30 days past due. We began to work with OPI, the Department of Finance, and all of the other agencies that, any agency in the city that has an invoice past 30 days, are on the line with me and we are looking at a very clear dashboard that shows where they are, how many invoices, which vendors, how long. And we dropped that number from 22 million in outstanding invoices to 5.7 million. That is not ideal. I'm not saying that to brag about the fact that we only had, within a matter of 7 or 8 months, 5.7 million or so in late invoices. But what I am saying is that that was a dramatic decrease in the amount of late invoice payments that were outstanding from our government. I also believe that the migration of Workday in FY23 will significantly improve this as well. I know you all are probably getting calls about this. I'm certainly getting calls and emails about it, and we have significant work to do. But I use that as an example to say that I completely agree with you that we have to use these reform platforms to get problems resolved, and I believe that's what we've been doing, and some of the technology will help us to that effect, and to do it in a much more systemic way, so that I don't have to continue to do those calls, because we are actually getting to root cause and getting the problem resolved in a way that that allows for us to have good government service without my involvement.
Well, that part I'm glad to hear, because there's probably a lot of subcontractors in the city that's actually out of business because of that process was horrible. So I'm glad to hear that. My question and request is the findings from those agencies. Do you have that, and what your recommendations were? Because we can sit and have this conversation, and most of my colleagues, we'll probably still be getting the same phone calls about the same problem from some of the same agencies. So my question and recommendation is, can you share with this council the recommendations? I mean, the what you found, where the miscommunication, the breakdown was, and what the recommendations were for those particular agencies. Because we don't see this, it's not there, it's not written. My colleague sitting right here gonna still have the same phone calls, and we having this conversation with you about the recommendations and what the breakdown was. Can we get that request in writing to this council here? Because it's not just my district, it's all over the city.
It's very broad, so maybe I could work with you to better, if it's grounds maintenance, yes, we can absolutely develop some information on where we were in terms of ground maintenance and all the work that has happened over the last 12 months since we were together last to talk about grounds maintenance last year in preparing for the season. If you remember, at this point last season, we didn't have, in some cases, contracts in place. Agencies were not working together in a coordinated way, and we were receiving all kinds of complaints about grass not being cut. That is not happening today. Now, I'm going to knock on wood, because we are still early in the season, but agencies are working together. Agencies are working together, and all of the contracts that needed to be in place were in place at the start of the season. I mean, I know that's a very basic thing that we should get right, and I shouldn't have to brag about. But the reality is, last year when we started the grounds maintenance season, we did not have contracts in place because of our procurement process, because some of the vendors were going back and forth in terms of cost. Whatever the case is, today, the contracts are in place where we need them to be in place. Our crews and staff are clear about their responsibility, and we actually have a quality assurance and quality control program where we're going around taking photos to make sure that not only our vendors, but that our own crews are doing the work that they've committed to doing.
Okay, I ain't gonna drag this out, but you also responsible for overseeing housing, because they still have permit problems. I still get emails. I still have grass that has not been cut. North Avenue look like a jungle. Some of the lots look like a jungle, so I don't know exactly. That's why I'm asking all the agencies, not just DPW, all those agencies that had some kind of disconnect, do you have that information and what the recommendations were? And I think that should go to the chair of this committee, and then he can share it with everybody here.
Councilman, can you please summarize that request in one sentence?
The request is the findings from these agencies about the calls that we get about the real disconnect, I guess, when someone calls, not particularly about DPW, when they call about water bill, when they call about grass, when you talk about permits over in housing, there's a disconnect. There's no follow-up from those agencies with a constituent. When you went into those agencies and found out what the disconnect was, those findings, the recommendations, do you have that also? The findings of these agencies and the recommendations to change how they operate.
Thank you. Nate, on our side, can you start tracking these? And Nina, I'm assuming, as in years past, so this is request number one. Councilman, let me take a stab at just summarizing that. It sounds like you're looking for a written narrative explaining any discrepancies that may exist between agency responses to the public and the extent to which they're tracking that. Is that?
And what their findings were.
Does that make sense? Or please feel free to reframe it a different way, what you think would be responsive to the councilman's request.
I'm not sure that I could reframe.
You say you're not sure?
Right, because so if we're talking about grounds maintenance, yes.
I mean, we talk about DPW, we know there's a problem with them cutting grass and with the constituents. When you talk about permits, people are still sending me emails about permits over housing. The stuff is still there. So when you went to the agency, what did you change in terms of reporting back to the council to make that a smoother operation for the constituents? The same thing with DPW, same thing with housing, all those city agencies, because it's not just one agency. It's a
So
whole lot of them.
part of, and I'm happy to do this again, part of what we did a few months ago in terms of the performance, the annual performance informational hearing was to talk about these kinds of ongoing performance issues and how I am involved and my office is involved in those issues. I don't know that I understand. I'm trying to sort of visualize what it would look like to respond to that kind of.
Yeah, can we come back to this one? And so Nate and Nina, if you can hold off, I want to come back to it. I think I know what the councilman's trying to say, and I think you guys are doing something. So we'll come back to that. Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here today. I have two super big questions that might have some sub-questions with it. First of all, thank you for making sure that there's additional dollars in the budget for the lawyers that we need to make sure that the new judicial in-rem process.
Thank you for pushing us and for your work.
This is super important and a major game changer, and I'm just glad that we're there. My question is specifically around the 30-day memo. Since you're heading up the working group, I guess you'll be doing the monitoring of the what was in the memo. There was a lot of money in that memo that was outlined, and we will have a full hearing about all the strategies and everything in that. But my question is specifically around two pieces that were in there just about money, since we're in budget right now. One was the commitment of $50 million a year in capital funding. And I'm wondering, I did not see that in the bond issues that were just introduced. So I'm wondering where and it's obviously not in the budget. So can you tell me where that is and what?
Sure, I'm going to give Bob an opportunity to respond, but let me be clear that the memo was a list of recommendations, not a predisposition to the mayor's position on funding. So the mayor is still going to ultimately be in a position to say yes or no to funding any program or service in the years to come and in the budgets to come. So I wouldn't want to mistake that the memo that I sent to the mayor and that we are absolutely tracking in a very regimented way has now binded the mayor to a specific funding commitment for the next several years, because it has not.
Well, just because I think we can have all of the systems that we need to make this work, but this is going to take money. This, as I said in my paper, it's going to take $3 billion. This is a $3 billion problem. And so I'm just curious if those recommendations were laid out, what is if they're not going to happen, that's unfortunate. So this is what I'm trying to understand. You know, it was published, you know, publicly that these were the recommendations. So it was my understanding that these were what we were doing.
So it was published as recommendations, not as a funding strategy, to be clear. I just want to be clear. And I'd also say that ultimately, I believe the mayor has demonstrated his commitment to housing and to really working this issue. We also have other funding needs, and this is a city with a great deal of underinvestment in many areas. And so where we can, and Bob certainly can attest to this, we are certainly pushing the envelope, but what I don't want to misconstrue is that the memo of recommendations that I sent to the mayor and that we are working on as a working group has now binded the mayor to a specific amount of funding because it hasn't. We're going to be working to ensure that where we can fund, we will.
Okay. Do you want to answer that, Bob?
Nothing more to add. I think City Administrator summed it up really well in terms of, you know, it gives us an understanding of, you know, what the need is and what that would accomplish, but, you know, it doesn't bind us, of course, to doing that. We'll look for any way we can to provide resources for that, but as the Administrator said, a lot of competing resources and trying to work through all those to see what we can commit.
So just as a follow-up, can you point to, and maybe this is a request for later, the specific items in the budget that are increased as a result? I mean, obviously the lawyers, which again, I'm thrilled about, so I appreciate that. I think demolition and stabilization money is increased from 8 million to 11 million or something like that. Can we get some of the, outlined maybe, and then the commissioner can maybe be prepared to talk about that on Monday? Because there's the set of recommendations which are really critical. It obviously shows a commitment that you understand what the issues are, because basically what was outlined in the memo was, you know, the money really needed. So I just want to see that there's actually, in addition to the lawyers, a commitment that we're going to be like, this is a major investment that we're going to have to make. And also, maybe it's not in the budget, but maybe it's what is the commitment to raise the money, right? There's capital out there. And so, you know, I haven't seen, you know, where that is. So maybe we can have a separate conversation, and then the commissioner can be ready to answer those questions on Monday.
Sure, we'll certainly prompt the commissioner to be prepared. I think to some extent this is an ARPA question for the commissioner in terms of laying out the ARPA program where the $100 million investment will go. In addition to the positions that were added as part of the ongoing operating budget, I think it's important to talk about the strategic investments in specific programs and services, demolition included. The Department of Finance also added FTEs associated with that set of recommendations to help clear title.
Right.
And so, yes, we'll make sure that the commissioner, that we talk to housing as they are preparing for their hearing on next Monday, I believe.
I think it's Monday, yeah. That would be helpful, and I have some additional questions that I'll send to that is, because I know we're running out of time today, and I want to be mindful of my colleagues. My other question is on a totally separate subject. Today was the first time that I heard about the infrastructures are. I read this whole thing, both volumes, word for word, and I did not see it in here. maybe I missed it, it's totally possible. I'm wondering where it is in here. Is it a new person that you're hiring? Are you hiring from within? Is it one person? Is it an office? Because remember, we did this with the Office of Recovery, where, you know, we had dedicated. So, you know, is there also a separate set of money that's coming in for that? Are you using infrastructure money? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can answer that. It's in the, if you look in the mayor's office section, mayoralty page, starting on page 352, there's a new activity listed for that office. If you look on page 358, activity 42, which is at the bottom. This was something that was added later in the process, so it was not in the preliminary budget. Just to clarify, this was something that was added for the final budget that came to council.
And it's it looks like it's $2 million that has been allocated.
That's right.
So that would be like 3 or 4 people, not just one person. Is that correct?
It would be an office, yes.
Right.
The position that administrator is talking about would be the lead of that office, but then the additional funding would be to build out that office with additional staff.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you're hiring new. Do we know more about that piece?
We'll announce, hopefully sooner rather than later, how we plan to staff. We will likely work with the mayor to make the announcement.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, I know that in the past I've always been a stickler for schedule and ending at the exact minute that the session is over. We have all worked with Bob Seneme long enough so he can certainly be the beneficiary of this, but I'd like to extend the City Administrative Officer, Mr. Shorter, if your schedule permits.
Of course.
So if there's no objections, all right. We are going to go to Council Vice President Middleton next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Vice President.
So I do want to thank my colleagues. Just about everyone that has spoken so far really talked about coordination, and we still have a terrible problem with coordination with agencies and getting specific jobs completed. And then also, someone mentioned about 311, and I remember having a hearing where we wanted to change the language and close the close process, and evidently it seems like it had started out well, but then it's going back to the same old thing where residents do not understand what closed means, and it was almost promised that that language was going to be changed in the process, even through the process, putting it, you know, through the technology piece. So I don't, you know, I think that really needs to be checked out.
I'll certainly investigate with Director Allen.
So I guess my question, you know, you've talked about this new office, the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development, a transformational plan. Those quarterly updates, are they going to be coming to the council, or how are those quarterly updates going to happen?
They are actually available to the general public. So we have an action plan tracker that's available online for everyone to see. And we've committed to making quarterly updates to all of the commitments we've made in terms of actions within that plan.
Okay. And you mentioned agencies and individuals that work for the city. They're going to have performance measures and so on, which they have been doing for a while. What makes this different? What are you doing differently?
Currently, about 30% of our workforce actually has performance evaluation plans, and we would need to navigate work and work with our bargaining units to to ensure that larger percentages of our workforce that we are conducting regular evaluations. The performance management framework, the system of agencies having performance plans in place agency by agency, makes it much easier for us to do individual performance evaluations connected to the agency. So we say to our solid waste worker that you have these 5 SMART goals that we're going to be measuring your performance on every year. It's hard to tell an employee, an individual employee, you didn't do a good job, or we're going to move in a different direction without having some sort of measure in place to say this is what the job is, this is what your performance should look like. And so that's why it's really important. And right now, as an organization, we are not doing very well in terms of having those kinds of plans in place and providing that kind of coaching and direction to employees, so that an employee who may just be on the borderline and not intentionally failing, but not receiving the kind of support, guidance, coaching, training that they should in order to get better at their individual jobs. The way we do that is by evaluating them and coaching them on a regular basis year over year. And so what is different about this is the expansion of that of a performance evaluation program beyond the 30% or so of employees that currently do performance evaluations, and that those evaluations would be based on agency performance plans and not just the supervisor or manager that is directly responsible for that employee.
Okay, and lastly, Mr. Chair, this transformational plan, this new Office of Infrastructure Development, you know that the city should have a strong partnership with the Baltimore City Public School System. And you know that they are also going through infrastructure changes, closing schools. There's buildings now around the entire city, I have 4 in my district, that they need a plan. Once these buildings are turned over to the city, there needs to be an immediate plan worked on of what's going to happen to these buildings. They shouldn't sit for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. They get vandalized, so on and so forth. And it's become a burden in the communities. What role will that piece play in this whole infrastructure development? Two responses.
There is currently a group led by DGS. I know our deputy city administrator is involved in a surplus property, and that is to say how we prepare property for sale. We have definitely pushed the gas pedal on that process and have already moved to move 3 or 4 schools and other government property to sell and prepare them for sale so that we can put them back into active use. That group certainly receives my attention, and when we are ready and believe we're ready to monetize an asset, we are in a position to do so. Second, the infrastructure czar, or the infrastructure office, mostly I would say the connection here is we are about to receive a pretty one-time generational amount of resources for the purpose of updating our infrastructure. Infrastructure in most cases that is crumbling for our city. Roads, bridges, wastewater infrastructure. And so ultimately, we want to be in a position as a city to be the most competitive because unlike ARPA, unlike recovery dollars, these resources won't just be allocated to us through the federal government and through the state. There will be some portion of it that is allocated, but a majority of it will be competitively granted to us, meaning our city will have to compete with other cities across the country for these resources, and we'll have to make commitments to the federal government about how we will leverage the funds. In order for us to be competitive, we need an office of dedicated people to help make sure that we are writing the grants in the right way, that we are reporting back on the funds when we get it, and that the agencies are managing the funds, meaning that we are actually project managing it in a way that keeps us on time and on budget. And so it's a critically important office at this time, and will position the city, I think, to take full advantage of this moment and allow for us to get as much of the resources as possible to improve our infrastructure.
I particularly, and I'll end with this, Mr. Chair. And I use my area as an example, but school facilities that come back to the city have become a strong burden on council members. We're left in the community with this building and trying to help figure out what to do with it. I went through the whole first process with Langston Hughes Community and Resource Center. I worked on the plan and helped to get that building useful. I have other buildings that have not been, Green Spring has been there forever, empty, and there's been problem after problem after problem, and no one in the city has a plan for any of these buildings. I mean, I really can, it's true. No one has a plan in the city. And the burden is getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm sure some of my colleagues can also, talk about their experiences. So, those buildings are connected to pipelines. They're connected to, they have copper wire things in them. It's creating more crime in areas that have never had crime before. So I think that this is one thing that you really need to include in the, I guess, job specs of maybe the infrastructure czar. Relook at how you're making responsibility to some of the people in this particular office if the agencies aren't doing it themselves, because it's taking up too much time for council members. And I've been experiencing this at least the last 5-6 years. And again, that is not the job of a council member. My feelings are heavy right now because I'm sure you know some things that are going on. And it's developed over time. It's not just something that has happened. Plans need and it needs to be that partnership with the comptroller's office. Coordination is key to all of this, and there's a lack of coordination that I still see in every single agency. They're out there doing their own thing and not working with each other. And I think part of that might be with, they're fighting over funding as well. But it trickles down and it hurts the community, and it's putting a burden on council members where we could be helping in other areas. So just kind of sharing that added thing with you that has been going on for a very long time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Couple quick housekeeping items on the discussion of the mayor and the administration's memo on how to deal with vacant housing. We're going to send over an email with a copy of the memo, which of course you're familiar with because you guys wrote it, along with a letter from Councilwoman Ramos. She's going to follow up to that email with some more specifics in terms of questions and topics of discussion that we'd like to address during the DHCD hearing. So we'll send that over to you and Bob and to Commissioner Kennedy and copy the government relations team. And also want to take a note to congratulate you all on having Kimberly Rubens working for you instead of the city council where she used to be and first started.
She's a superstar.
Fantastic win for you all. Let's jump over to Councilman Conway, followed by Councilman Dorsey, and then Schleifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, City Administrator. I
Actually,
appreciate-
hang on one second. I'm sorry, one other housekeeping item, Councilman, I'm sorry. Request number one, perfect. So request number one from Councilman Stokes. So we had talked about 311 calls, and essentially what's happening is those calls for service are being closed out, but the service has not yet been completed. So for example, constituent calls about the grass not being cut, 311, whether it's the operator or through the application or through their browser, says 15 days until it will be resolved. 15 days passes, 311 operator or the app says request has been closed, right? This is the whole like 311 request being closed without completed, which we've been talking about for a couple years and predates this administration. The question is, and I think it's a request for a written narrative from your office as to what your office has been doing in terms of rounding up or hurting the respective agencies to resolve when those issues are happening. So understanding how frequently that's happening when a request is being closed, but the service has not actually been completed. So measuring that and then understanding what your office is doing in order to help improve that, if you will. I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Conway. Happy to reopen it for public discussion, or we can connect offline, but that's essentially the request.
Okay. We should connect offline. I mean,
Let's connect after this,
Okay.
as soon as this session's over. Is that good? Okay. Councilman Conway, apologize for interrupting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, City Administrator Shorter. I appreciate the presentation. I also, being a performance management geek, the structure that you've put into play, I think it's really important. And I never talk loud enough, so I'll get this a little closer to my mouth. I appreciate the infrastructure that you put into play. I think it's really important that we build that infrastructure. It'll play out over time, I think, in very beneficial ways. I have a couple of things I want to touch on. First, I wanted to just kind of piggyback on Vice President Middleton's point about surplus buildings in schools. I've got two in my district right now. One we're having a number of issues with regarding mowing. And I just kind of want to put this as a tab in your head. I think we have to make sure that we consistently maintain those buildings because they can end up being more problems over time. Specifically in my mind is Guilford Elementary. We had 3-foot tall grass, and I'm not kidding, I have photos in that building, and I think we assumed that because we were not using it, we didn't have to maintain it. But of course, there's a surrounding community where people live, and it could be a significant eyesore. So I just want to put that on your radar.
thank you.
The questions I have, and I'll be brief because I know there are a couple other folks after me. I noted that we are creating an assistant deputy mayor position, or excuse me, a number of assistant deputy mayor positions and a director of LGBTQ affairs. I noted also that we have not had a deputy mayor of public safety since mid-February. And I wanted to know where we were with filling that position, knowing how important it is to our strategy in crime fight.
Sure. We conducted interviews last week, and the mayor is working through the details of the results of those interviews, and will hopefully be making an announcement in the coming weeks. So appreciate that question very much, because it is a critical position given the mayor's priority and where our city is. And so we have absolutely advanced the ball, just hoping that in the next few weeks we'll be able to speak publicly about our next deputy mayor.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, of course, I am very hyper-focused on that, realizing how important it is for coordinating not just our internal city agencies, but our also state and federal partners, which leads me to my next question. I know we've made a couple of changes in the structure of city stat, my favorite topic. So I was kind of curious how we were thinking about some of those cross-cutting stats that used to exist, that being gun stat. Clean stat is one of them. How are we making sure that we're leveraging relationships and partnerships inside city agencies and also outside of city agencies, including state and federal partners, in light of, we know that, and honestly also between city agencies, a lot of the close means close issues are issues because they're transferred from one agency to another, and those systems don't communicate. So how are we thinking about those cross-cutting issues as we've sort of asked agencies to take on more of a responsibility of staying on top of their performance?
Yeah, it is one of the core elements of the STAT program, as you know. So if we're doing a STAT on a specific topic or specific portfolio of work, i.e. clean and healthy communities, it is because there is a requirement around multiple agencies and coordination. And so it is, I see it as core. And so it is because of the very limited number of stats that we're doing, I shouldn't say very limited, because of the number of stats that we're doing, we have to be very strategic in terms of which stats we take on. And what that means is that, you know, where we see the biggest challenges and the biggest need for an opportunity for coordination, those are the stats that ultimately result. And so the clean stat involves more than just grounds maintenance. We're talking about a portfolio of work being done at DHCD, Rec and Parks, Transportation, Public Works, and all those agencies. Season by season, those stats might look a little different depending on which service is most important at that time, i.e. right now, grounds maintenance. But in the fall, it might be another sort of topic that takes precedent at that stat.
Sure, I appreciate that. I think I realize a lot of the issues that we have in city government are when we have to work with other people and sometimes across agencies. And so Clean Stat has always been one of those endeavors. It's been incredibly helpful for the mayor's office and now the city administrator's office to sort of bring people together, identify issues, fix those issues, or figure out what needs to happen to fix those issues. So, you know, I encourage you to continue thinking about those opportunities, the sinewy opportunities between agencies, both state and federal, and the city government, because I think those are where we find the biggest gains. I think I'll move on to my final question, and this is with regard to vacancies again. I know we've had trouble recruiting, and we continue to see significant vacancies across all agencies. Have we pulled together any plan, strategy? What is going to be our approach to make sure that we can fill these holes? We know it's had an impact on any number of things, going to Councilman Schleifer's question earlier about recycling and our ability to do it weekly. Also in other management issues across the city, I can go on, but you're very familiar with the issue. What are we going to do about it? How are we tackling that problem?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. We pushed really hard because of the challenges around sort of unfilled positions and the impact that was having, particularly on agencies like DPW. We had 2 recruitment events, not recruitment fairs, where we have an open-ended and very broad call for residents and others to come in into an auditorium style or convention style event. What we are instead doing, and appears to be very successfully doing, our Department of Human Resources is working with the Mayor's Office of Employment Development, working with agencies to hold very specific recruitment events. We've had 2 this year so far. Each of the 2 brought in over 1,000 applicants. These recruitment events also have on-site contingency hires, and so we are doing the sort of on-the-spot hiring where possible, and for job classes that are appropriate for that. We had 350, and I may be getting the number wrong, and maybe 353 applications for sanitation worker, for example, in one of the recruitment events. Critical job for us. We're also doing programs like where we can fund job training and or workforce training type programs that become essentially a feeder program for our agencies. I think about, and you'll hear during the Monty hearing, the program that we refer to as for returning citizens, residents behind the wall, where we are bringing returning citizens back, but before they come back, we are making sure that they are job ready. So we're working to get them trained, to connect them with an employer, to get all of their documentation in place so that when they come back to Baltimore City, they already have a job in place and can begin training. That's the exact group of residents that we want to ultimately make sure that we are using those types of programs to feed into some of the hard-to-fill positions, training them for CDL, to earn their CDLs, et cetera. So just a few examples, if you will, of strategies that we're using to help fill those vacancies.
And this, I realize, Mr. Chair, we don't have HR on the agenda for these hearings, but I would suggest also, we do? I'm mistaken, we do. But I think it's important also to think about succession planning, realizing that we have a number of folks who've been in these positions for 20 plus years, and they have a lot of longstanding knowledge that when they retire or otherwise get hired somewhere else as a consultant making double, we lose that insight, that knowledge, and it's been an issue that's come up recently, as you're fully aware. I want to make sure that we're thinking about those issues too. Of course, making sure that we fill, those labor roles that, as long as you can carry something heavy, you can do the job. But then there are some of these technical roles that take more experience and more time and more technical knowledge. That if we start looking at young and mid-year professionals today, we can groom them to be the leaders in the next 5 or so years. So, thank you, City Administrator. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, a question for you, Mr. Chair. Last year, you made a concerted effort to ask, I think, everybody who presented to us for their agency's org chart and contact list. Given the level of turnover and given the fact that that list is in the form of like PowerPoint presentations, PDFs, spreadsheet, 2 different kinds of Excel spreadsheets, and Word docs. First, I mean, are you planning on asking everybody for updated information this year? And second, would it make sense for us to ask the CAO to spearhead this and give us this all in like kind of maybe one document?
Yes, I already made the ask. Did not make the ask to the CAO, and does not make sense in my mind to go to him. I made the ask of government relations. They are working on that. They have submitted, I want to say, 12 or 13. Natasha, can you give a quick update at the mic of where you guys are at in that? But we will, as we have done in years past, and there was a couple that trickled in late last year, my staff and the council president's staff will aggregate those, get those in a normalized naming convention.
Okay.
Right, because some people call them crazy things, right? We want it to all look the same and be uniform, and then we'll send that out to the entire council as a zip package as we did last year. So I believe those were originally due either on, I think today or May 27th.
Yeah, we have 13 of the agencies, org charts and information, and we'll make sure to get them all over as soon as possible.
And when were they due, today or today?
I'd have to verify the date.
We'll verify it.
So we gave them until the end of today.
Okay.
So certainly understandable that they're not all in yet. They've
Sure.
been very proactive. I think one agency kind of went off on their own. I won't get them in trouble and sent them directly to me. That's fine. But they sent about a dozen. So Natasha, if you could follow up at Call of Business today and just let us know what the status is, and tell us who's outstanding, that would be appreciated. And then, like I said, hopefully we'll get that out tomorrow.
Okay. The only other thought I had was about just the formatting of it. If it, I understand you're compiling a lot of folks, it would be glorious if it were like all one type of document or even compiled into one document. I mean,
Appreciate the suggestion. Too late to implement for this year.
Yeah.
As always, Chair is more than happy to accommodate members' requests on how to improve this process moving forward, and I am certain that we can incorporate your excellent suggestion into next year's process, Councilman.
thank you, sir. Now for the CAO. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have, well, first, as my colleague Councilman Schleifer and others have pointed out, we face a huge volume of constituent service issues, and over time we come to recognize patterns of problems, and sometimes those are problems that touch on and need to be addressed if they're going to be addressed by multiple agencies, and we need, you know, the typical traditional approach is, well, talk to the deputy mayor who oversees those couple of, but often enough it's more than one deputy mayor because it's reaching into multiple agencies that are in multiple deputy mayors' portfolios, and to me that seems like the place where we go, enough's enough. We have a chief administrative officer, they have staff, these are the people that should be coordinating multiple agencies. Who do we have on staff in your office to help us with that stuff other than you and the deputy CAO? I don't know anybody else in your staff to help with those kind of things.
Thank you for that question. This is the reason that we need additional support. So there is no one else. I mean, so you email me directly, you email Chi-Chi directly, and you should continue to. I do have a special assistant, but Ari Giles is focused in on the mayor's action plan and the transformation work, the government transformation work. His cell phone number will certainly be on the list that is sent to you. There is not a large office here. There has been a pretty significant outflow of people from the mayor's office. And so, sorry, I can't answer that question more fully.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd like to make headway on some of the things that, you know, like used tires and towing and certain things that touch on multiple agencies and that have an opportunity to benefit multiple agencies, but it's kind of a tedious process. So I appreciate your support. The other question, I guess, is related to this. We have agencies that have like single agency problems, like division level problems, where the folks running those divisions are allowing problems to go on and on and on, and they're like again, from our perspective, where we see them as pattern problems, we go, I would have a whole lot less on my plate in terms of constituent calls and upset residents if the person running this particular division would fix this problem. But often enough, I find that those people are next to impossible to work with in terms of just like getting them to herd cats and shift mindset or even understand that they have a problem on their hands. And it sounds like you don't have additional staff to be able to address those kind of problems when working with the agency doesn't seem to yield benefits. Is that, but it would seem to me that's when we're talking about an agency having a problem of administering a process or executing a process in the most efficient manner, that to me comes down to something that's within the scope of what the CAO is about.
Yeah. On issues where I am able to forward an email from you or from your colleagues or from a constituent, from a resident, from a vendor, from a community organization, and that problem be resolved within 24 hours or 48 hours, I am grateful to the workforce. I'm grateful to employees. I'm grateful to those same division managers that they're able to resolve an issue quickly. The challenge is where we deal with issues that are not so easily resolved and that linger because they are not issues that that division manager feels he or she can quickly on their own deal with and resolve, as you well know. And I think what I'm going to have to say is that we'll need to continue to be involved in those issues until we build the muscle within the agency. I will also say that I am going to almost 100% of the time go back to the agency director. Ultimately, we have very talented leaders, and we have to empower those leaders at the agency level to work with their employees and not do it for them. And so if I'm personally reaching out to a division manager within an agency, I consider that a problem. So ultimately, agency directors should be able to build the kind of organization that makes responsiveness a part of the everyday job. And so that's what the mayor and others within the mayor's office will be pushing for, so that we won't have to continue to build up the mayor's office staff so that we're doing the job for agencies, but that we're building agencies to do the job based on their mission for themselves.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. If you go to the Baltimore City Council's website under My City Council and reports and studies, the first thing there is a $12-page long report that was written by members of the City Council, the Office of Council Services, five different city agencies. I think it's 17 people altogether on the issue of nuisance parking and auto businesses. I have not been able to get any headway on addressing and implementing any of the solutions put forth in this report.
So, Councilman, I want to hold on that because we did, at your request, I put that information in a letter to the administration.
Great.
So I don't want to duplicate efforts here.
Great. I just want to make sure that I'm lifting that up myself as well. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. It's not just an email to forward at this point. It's a 12-page long report. It makes clear recommendations. Want to see some progress on this. Thank you.
I'm happy to take a look at the recommendations, but if they're recommendations, then I consider them recommendations. And so we'll certainly take a look, but don't want to make any promises today, having not seen the 12-page document.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. we move into second round. First, want to compliment Chi-Chi Nyagi-Nash, excellent hire in your office. Also want to compliment the Social Club Action Task Force. They really have been doing the Lord's work. That group is excellent, responsive, professional, does a great job of representing the city and enforcing laws, rules, and regulations in a fair manner across the board. So really appreciate that. First thing I want to ask about key positions in city government that are currently vacant. I want to talk about senior staff in the mayor's office, and then I want to talk about deputy director and up. My understanding is that the only senior staff position that's currently vacant is deputy mayor for public safety. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And do we know what the status of that hire is?
We have conducted interviews and are vetting finalists now.
So we don't currently have a finalist?
No.
Okay, it's very disappointing to hear because that's not what I've heard from other members of the mayor's senior staff. Do we have an idea of when that finalist will be selected and an offer will be made?
No. Ultimately, we'll have to work with the mayor. I don't want to put a timeline out without being clear with the mayor and what his timeline is. Ultimately, this is a very personal selection because it's a deputy mayor that oversees a portfolio of work that the mayor is very close to and tied to, and so I don't want to make any false public promises about the hire. So we are very close. I think we have made some good progress of late, and my hope is that in the next few weeks we'll be able to make an announcement maybe before.
I'll just leave this topic at that position has been vacant for 3.5 months. And based on what you're telling me, it does not feel like there is the same sense of urgency that we all are feeling around the issue, more specifically filling this position. This position plays a critical role in coordination of public safety efforts, both on the law enforcement and the civilian side. And I hope that there is going to be more progress on this, and I do plan to raise this issue again during the last day of budget hearings on Tuesday, and I hope that there is a tangible update that can be provided at that time. But for now, we are not moving quickly enough on this. I'm hopeful that you all will make a decision and make a decision very soon. So I ask that you bring that message back to the mayor directly and the senior team, and that you all double down on your efforts to make this hire as quickly as humanly possible and to make the right hire. But again, 3.5 months in, we have an expectation that we move quicker than that, and I hope that you can appreciate where we're coming from. Next, Director of Finance, Bob's new boss. Do we have any updates there?
We have conducted final interviews and we'll be able to. I'm actually not sure where we are with the negotiating with that final candidate, and so don't want to jeopardize any back and forth. So we'll say that we are very close to being able to make an announcement. We had a final set of interviews 2.5 weeks ago, and so we are, I believe, much closer there with naming a finalist. I'm sorry, naming the next CFO for the city.
So we have made a decision on who we would like to serve in that role. Like we have a clear one finalist that we're going to make that we're negotiating with.
I'm not going to have that kind. So ultimately, me saying publicly that we have one finalist would have an impact on negotiating, and so and that finalists could fall through, or set of finalists could fall through. We are in the process now of making arrangements to make an announcement. My hope is that that announcement could be made relatively soon. We had final interviews, meaning no additional interviews will be conducted 2.5 weeks ago. And so we are now in the process of negotiating. And so wouldn't want to sort of go further than that publicly.
Sure. I don't want to jeopardize that process, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and if you feel like if your potential response would jeopardize that process, just let me know and we'll move to the next question. So we had we had a round of final interviews approximately 2.5 weeks ago, correct?
Yeah, so if you ultimately, okay, so I'll do this. Yes, that's right.
Okay. And then the administration is meeting internally as well as communicating with a subset of, and a subset of could be anywhere from one to the entire universe of individuals that participated in those final interviews?
Yes, we are communicating with a subset of the individuals who participated in the final interviews.
Okay. Is Director Raymond going to stay on until his replacement is on board?
He is.
Okay. Because
There will not be a gap in leadership or service. So he has worked with us very generously in that.
So he will stay past June 30th if need be.
He will stay past June 30th if need be. And even if an announcement is made, plans to provide for some period of time of overlap so that we have a good handoff. And I'll step back and say that the Director of Finance and the CFO for the city is a position that holds great weight in the city, and I would even say greater weight than what you might find in other cities, given the portfolio of services that report into the CFO. Mm-hmm. We are also a city that requires a CFO with an impeccable record in terms of background and credentials, and so we are being very diligent about the selection, and do not want a lot of transition in that position. So are looking for, have really focused on candidates that can be here and be a part of our government for the long haul. And so we are, I think, in the final stage of the selection, of the negotiating process.
Excellent. And then lastly, any deputy director or higher vacancies throughout city government? I know that we recently filled DGS, excellent selection, by the way. Are there any other deputy director or higher vacancies that you know of that are open?
There are several, actually. I didn't come prepared to name them all, but our larger agencies, almost all, have a senior level executive that needs to be filled. And so I think about support for the Commissioner Kennedy and Director Mitchell and some of our other large agencies. Director Sharkey. I mean, they are all, either their number 2 or number 3 needs to be filled.
Got it. Can you provide us, so I guess this is request number 2, and we're going to come back and edit number 1 for Nate and Nina. Can you provide us a list of those positions? And I think the qualifying criteria would be deputy director and higher, or some agencies assistant commissioner or deputy commissioner or division chief, you know, essentially like, and just throw out a couple names like a Tim Knight, chief of right of way, or an Yvonne Moore Jackson, chief of solid waste, but essentially that level and up of vacant positions.
Acting chief.
Yes, correct. Vacant positions, as well as how long those positions have been vacant for.
Sure.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And is that something within reason that you could get to the committee by this Friday?
I would be relying on HR to work with the agencies to pull that vacancy list together.
We have Mr. Herbert tomorrow at 12:30. I'm glad I taped the schedule to the desk, one of the process improvements this year. Okay, we will also let Director Herbert know about that request, and Nina and team, Natasha and team, if you can let them know that that's coming, just to get them prepared. And the infrastructures are, can you tell me a little bit about that? And then that's my second question, and then I'll be moving on to Councilman Schleifer next.
Your 20-second question.
Sure. As I stated earlier, it's an extremely important time for us in terms of making sure that we're competitive as a city, as the federal government is beginning to ramp up sending out grant awards, I should say grant applications. Some have already come from MOGR, 2 agencies. And so the infrastructures will be focused on 3 things primarily. One, making sure that we are competitive in terms of grant writing and identifying those federal awards, and then working with agencies to make sure that we are presenting as strong of an application as possible. 2, this infrastructure czar will focus on the procurement and BOE approval process. So getting this, getting the money into the city and then getting it actually awarded could be a tall task given some of the current timelines associated with procurement and in the BOE process. So making sure that they're essentially expediting or holding these items so that they can walk them through the process. And then 3rd, project management. And so making sure that we are managing these construction projects in particular on time and on budget. And so building some level of expertise around project management for agencies that need that support. Transportation, public works are already cooking with grease, as I used to say, doing very well in terms of managing projects, managing construction projects. I would not use this position to in any way impact the work that they are already doing. But other agencies like Rec and Parks, who may need supplemental support when it comes to renovation, construction activity, making sure that this office is there to supplement and support that work so that we can get recreation centers built, get them renovated faster and on budget. And that's just one example, but there are a few others around the city where an office focused on project management will be helpful. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. When I think about, I'm curious, when I think about folks in city government that are responsible for infrastructure, folks like Brian Ball, who's Division Chief of Asset Management at DPW, Adam Borman at Rec and Parks, obviously much of DGS, Kate Edwards at DHCD with land development, Kendall Abu Hakim at DOT handles maintenance, and a lot of our in-house stuff in terms of roadways. How do you see those folks interacting with this person? Is this person a resource to identify grant funding, or is this person going to be operating in an actual czar fashion within the administration where they're forcing coordination? So for example, and where I'm going with this question is work in the public right-of-way, specifically DOT, DPW, and then coordination with our partner utilities, whether that's BGE, Comcast, Verizon, Vicinity Energy, et cetera?
It's a great question. What I'll say is that coordination is important. I actually think my disposition around this is that there should be a capital infrastructure steering group that's helping to make sure agencies are aware of some of the challenges they're facing and barriers to progress. We are, even without infrastructure, without the Infrastructure Act and the money coming from that act from the federal and state government, we still have considerable resources that are about to be brought to bear in Baltimore City to build. And a citywide approach or steering committee that helps to make sure every agency understands what other agencies are doing, where the sort of bottlenecks are, where the challenges are, I think helps everyone. And so, yes, I think the czar will be in a position not to do the work for an agency like DPW or transportation, but to help to inform the work and make sure that they are moving through the city administrative processes in an efficient way.
One last comment on that. I think what I would add respectfully for your consideration is to force that coordination and collaboration, especially when we talk about work in the public right of way, because that coordination and collaboration is not happening to the extent that it can or should. So they're having someone in City Hall who's forcing that's speaking on behalf of the mayor, I think would help drive that in a more collaborative fashion. Do we have a job description for that position?
We do.
Can you please provide that to the committee? And that's request number 3, infrastructure czar position. Councilman Schleifer, thank you.
Thank you.
So what's the official, like, just one-liner as to why we got the $641 million of ARPA money?
Recovery
from COVID.
COVID-19, yes.
So a lot of things that we've heard on the council through different hearings over the past 2 years is that a lot of basic city functions are not being provided because of COVID. So what amount of the ARPA money has already been assigned to specific tasks or functions or organizations or just anything of the 641?
I believe we're scheduled to do an ARPA hearing later on this afternoon. I don't want to misspeak. So
it's in the budget publication. I think it's 481 million. There's an exhibit in the executive summary.
Okay, so a vast majority of it has already been allocated.
yes.
So a lot of the items that we've seen out there that have been announced already are new programs, new funding for external things. What percentage of that $500 million, which is already allocated, would you say is going to actually directly resolving functions, basic city functions that are currently not being provided to get them back on track?
I appreciate that question. It is hard to answer that question having not been prepared. What I will say is that part of the challenge with making sure that we are building the kind of government that can deal with the backlog of city services where that exists, and or make sure that we are bringing our city services back up to the levels of pre-pandemic service, is just the sheer number of employees, or I should say vacant positions. And so making sure that we have the right number of people assigned to specific activities and jobs is going to be critically important. In terms of ARPA, I will say that things like making sure that working conditions, one-time costs like improving the conditions of where employees come in and do work, the equipment that is used and leveraged by our employees to get work done, that these are one-time costs where we could and should be using our ARPA to help better position the city to get that work done. We are. And so, again, I don't have specific numbers here with me today, but we have certainly had that conversation as part of the ARPA spending plan.
So before I ask my follow-up on that, Mr. Chair, if I can make a budget request to just get an accounting of, from the $480 million, which is already allocated, what of those items, what of those monies and how much are going to current city functions that have backlogs to help clear that out, or to help address basic city functions that have been taken offline that are now, that money's going towards putting them back online? Is that a clear request?
Absolutely. Councilman, what I'm going to ask is that we hold on that request until the ARPA hearing. I want you to ask the same question, and then after you get a response from Director Kearney, then have you make the request.
Sure. I mean, my challenge is, you know, the ARPA, as far as the ARPA hearing is concerned, and we've already sat through many ARPA hearings, we haven't really gotten any answers from those ARPA hearings, and it seems like, you know, there's decisions being made, and I assume the decisions are coming from the top, right, which is your office, the mayor's office. I mean, that's the top, all right? And so my concern here is that, you know, we're coming in, you know, next year. Most of my budget questions I'm not going to even ask this year. I have a whole laundry list for next year when we actually have control, you know, of the budget. But you know, there's a lot of items.
Councilman, I just want to make sure that we're careful in the language that we use. We don't have control of the budget next year. Our ability, we are now enabled to move things within the budget. I just want to make sure.
So we now have some, we now have a seat at the table, shall we say?
Newer authority.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we'll finally have some say in the budget next year. But as far as this year's concerned, I mean, there's a lot of just basic city functions that the taxpayers are paying for that they're not getting. And, you know, I simply don't know how we respond to them when, you know, when they see announcements of $50 million here, $80 million there, and we're not doing the most basic city function like picking up recycling. And then when we talk about how we want to get to zero waste, my good colleague over here from the 4th District talks about that a lot. It's actually kind of comical when we talk about that stuff, because if you were to ask my 5-year-old how you can improve the environment, or how you can, you know, participate in, you know, saving the world or doing good thing, the first thing a 5-year-old will tell you is to recycle. That's the most basic environmental function that kids know. And we're not even doing that properly as a city. And so we've been told that those functions have come offline because of COVID, and yet that most basic function I see every single week. Recycling piling up in my district. I see the wind blowing it all over the district. I see a lot of that stuff ending up in our sewer systems. I see a lot of trash getting blown through the streets. And so, you know, at what point do we shift and say, well, we got this windfall to solve these problems? Are we going to actually like solve those problems? Like, is the remaining money going to go towards getting street sweeping back on and getting recycling back, you know, resumed again? You know, are we going to use that money to actually doing something that really is within our control of cleaning up the city?
Let me be clear about something around ARPA. ARPA will end. And if we spend American Rescue Plan dollars on positions, which is essentially what you're referring to when you mention recycling in particular, recycling is a routine service. If we fund routine services with ARPA dollars, we are going to find ourselves in 3 or 4 years having done a really good job for the moment and not built the kind of redundancy in our systems, made the kind of strategic investment in our systems that position us as a city in a much better way to actually to perform better over time. And so investments in equipment, for example, for our employees, investments in facilities with the ARPA dollars for our employees, puts us in a position where we're not spending that money in 5 years from taxpayers. That instead we have leveraged this moment to make these strategic investments so that in 5 years, if we need to invest operating dollars in positions, again, reoccurring every year cost, we could do that in a way that doesn't strain our budget.
So, and thank you for that, but you're actually making exactly my point, is that when I look at the ARPA funding, a lot of the funding is going to newly created positions that are not basic city functions, that are new external things that are being funded. I fully support 110%. If you want to go and make capital improvements, which you guys are this year, and I applaud that, to fire stations, to police stations, to other city buildings, to schools, to those functions of capital improvements, I'm behind that 110%, because there's been a lot of deferred maintenance for decades that hasn't been made. And so, you know, $641 million is pennies compared to what infrastructure improvements need to be made. But that furthers my point that we're creating a lot of future unfunded liabilities, that in 2 years from now, a lot of these functions that are being funded from this ARPA dollars are now going to be coming back to us on, you know, in the general fund, saying, well, how are we going to fund that if we're creating all these new positions? So my point is that first and foremost, we need to fund things that are current right now, basic city functions. We have 311 backlogs. We have things that we can actually clear out and improve. We can make improvements to, you know, there's a long backlog in forestry of trees that need to be trimmed back, of stumps that need to be removed. For instance, there was a gentleman driving down Northern Parkway in my district a month ago in regular day. It wasn't even like a crazy storm or anything, and a tree fell over and smashed his car. And you can see that if you go to my social media pages, you can see some of those pictures. It missed him by literally a foot, fell like right by the steering wheel. And so, you know, I've been long on forestry for, I guess, 6 years now on some of these things. If you drive down cross country right now, there are trees that will fall in the next year because they are hanging over, ready to fall. And when I go to forestry and say, hey, you guys need to remove that liability and, you know, take down that dead tree, they say we don't have the funding for it. We don't have this, we don't have that. And so what I would like to see is that we clear out those functions that we're supposed to be providing. It doesn't, you know, it's short-term gain when we see, you know, that we're announcing that, you know, we're going to, you know, add funding to a specific cause here or there, but that money's gonna run out. I mean, all this money that's gone to Muncie, that they're awarding these grants like overnight essentially, all of those people, all of those groups are now creating unfunded liabilities that are going to come due in 2 years. And we still have these backlogs and we still have these basic city functions. So, I mean, I would like to know, like, from the executive level, like, when do you plan to get recycling resumed, street sweeping resumed? These are functions that we can control. We cannot fix the school system overnight. We cannot fix public safety overnight, but we can clean up the city. And, you know, when I go down to DC, I don't see any trash on the streets. I don't see any, you know, and it's clean. And we've spoken about this. That's why I see you smiling. We've spoken about this, and that could be Baltimore. We could have a clean city, and this funding can get us there. But we're working in contrary to that right now by not having street sweeping, by not having recycling being picked up.
I don't disagree with you at all. I will say that we've talked about a number of programs that will be funded via ARPA, you know, cleaning up loose litter, bulk trash, waste, the illegal dumping that's been happening around the city. These are things that are critically important to the mayor, and that we do plan to deal with as part of the ARPA spend. And so I don't disagree. I think.
One last thing, if I may. and this would be my last question today of this hearing. So you were talking about capital improvements, right? Since I can't get any answers out of DPW, I'll just ask you because you're their boss. So we have a transfer station, Northwest Transfer Station in my district. I have contacted DPW no less than 100 times about the long wait times, and the line goes blocks long for people trying to drop off their trash. So is there going to be ARPA money spent on increasing capacity at the Northwest Transfer Station?
It's hard for me to answer that question on the spot. I would have to work with DPW on it.
So, okay, and so if we can get that answer, because when it comes to the illegal dumping that we then have to send a crew out to clean up, and it comes to, there's a lot of agencies when we have long lines like that, and I know this because I've navigated and dealt with it for years now, people waiting too long, they find a quiet spot in the neighborhood, they go dump it, right? And so then you have inspectors that have to go out there, then you have DPW has got to go eventually clean it up. There's then there's investigators who try to investigate and figure out, who dumped it. There's a lot of agencies touching it. What would be a whole lot cheaper and a whole lot more effective is if we increase capacity. And there's simple solutions to increase capacity at the Northwest Transfer Station that have not been produced, and this funding could easily produce that and solve that problem. So I would like to know if at any point that is part of the plan, because otherwise we're just spending a lot more money on the back end instead of just solving the problem on the front end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Stokes?
City Administrator Shorter, I guess when Mayor Scott, who was the president of the city council, talked about equity, and I know he the mayor and he really mean it. But when we talk about equity in city agencies, and I'm just using an example, in mostly poor black neighborhoods because of policies in the city and the disinvestment in black neighborhoods, and I sent you an article about a month ago about Channel 13 did a story on, in Baltimore City in the last 10 years, black home ownership has declined. And I'm bringing it up because when we talk about equity and we still practicing the same kind of policies and racism in this city and probably in the state in this country, there is no equity staff in these agencies that's fully staffed that's dealing with that. So if we still dealing with some of the disinvestment in black and brown neighborhoods, and we don't have staff that's dealing with the word everybody use, equity, it sounds good, it sounds great, but then we're not addressing equity in this city. So my question to you is there, I'm gonna use an example. I've been asking housing about their equity staff. They got one person, I think they got somebody that actually work for housing, just sit there and warm up the seat. That's not addressing equity. We have a whole lot of agencies in here that we talk about equity, but there is no fully staffed to talk about equity in this city. And it's very disturbing that if you don't have an equity staff in place, nothing's changing. Absolutely nothing. It's nowhere in the world that most of these council people sitting in here know majority of these black neighborhoods, most of the neighborhoods are poor black neighborhoods that have mostly all the vacancies. And we have not addressed it yet, and you can't address it if you don't have an equity staff in none of these agencies. So my question to you, when are we gonna have a full equity staff in some of these agencies to address some of this disinvestment in these poor black neighborhoods?
I definitely appreciate that question and the sentiment. Two responses. One, you are speaking fact. There are actual statistics associated with the number of black households and families that we are losing. And for that reason, we are working very clearly, and the mayor has been very clear about funding strategies that aim to bring black families and black households back to Baltimore, and investing in ways to do that. Second, in terms of the equity work, our chief equity officer is doing training across the board and citywide, even for those employees that are not designated by title as equity officer, but performing some some role, that there are now stewards really in every agency that are being required to participate in these regular coordination calls and training that are being done by and conducted by the Chief Equity Officer. I know that she plans to talk about that a little bit during her hearing, and that we've added now 2 positions to her office for FY23 to focus in on the equity assessment tool and making sure that we're looking at agencies and programs and services in the right way. And so don't want to overpromise that agencies will be able to repurpose positions, but certainly want to make sure that I'm clear about what the Chief Equity Officer is doing, the training that's being provided, and then the extra resources in the budget for FY23 to help with assessing agencies around equity issues.
My follow-up, that particular person who is in charge of equity, is that just for all city agency or particular one agency?
The Chief Equity Officer, Dana Moore, Director Moore.
Okay, I know Ms. Moore, but I'm talking about, we've been talking about this for 2 years, about this equity piece. And it's a little, not frustrating, but it's really disturbing to me that in 2 years, the same practice, the same policy has not changed in the city. And I know Ms. Moore is busting her chops because I had a conversation with her. But it's nothing changed. The same thing how housing distribute and do the disinvestment in black neighborhoods has not changed. It's the same thing in brown neighborhoods. It has not changed. So there is some more, I guess, Ms. Moore needs some more, not just staff, but some more power to change some of what these agencies are doing, because it's hard to change agencies who've been practicing this mess for a long time. We know that. So are we not just giving Ms. Moore the staff, but are we giving her the power to really sit down with these agents and make them understand? Because from my understanding, she probably been meeting with them, but it's just not having a conversation. But it's been difficult. So will you be following back up with Ms. Moore to make sure that these agencies understand they have to make that change? Because if we don't, I'm gonna come back here again, and me and you gonna have the same conversation, City Administrator, and we're gonna be having the same language. And it's really frustrating when my constituents, who Miss Susie that live next door to 10 vacant houses in her neighborhood, mowed, squatters, dirty yard, because we have not allowed Ms. Moore the power or the staff, she have the staff, but allow her to really move on this equity piece, which is real important in the city. You know that yourself, and I know that. So, just talking about what Ms. Moore has the staff, but what's behind the staff? I mean, there's been no movement. I mean, she got a staff, but there's no movement.
Yep. I look forward to having, she has a hearing as well, and I'll be present to hear her response to these questions. I'll say that, we are talking about a lot of investment in our city in the coming years, in the next 3 to 5 years. The mayor has articulated and really pushed us to think about this funding with an equity lens first. So all of the investment that we're talking about, especially the investment in housing, are going into neighborhoods that the same neighborhoods you've described, those neighborhoods that have been ignored by our city, blighted properties that have been walked past in terms of investment in the past. So I hear you and agree, and will say that in addition to the work that Dana Moore is doing, her and her team, around equity assessment and training, and ensuring that agencies have capacity, that separate and apart from that, the mayor's been very clear about how our investment is going to move throughout the city and who it will benefit.
Well, I'm going to make just one more statement. If we continue to give money to the same people that don't look like people like me, we give money, and I said this to you, we keep giving money to the same organizations that don't look like us, and their job is to make sure that home ownership work. Y'all need to watch that, because they're not doing it.
Thank you. Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add one statement to my colleague from the 12th District. And just to add, you know, I hear him also loud and clear. And just a point of information for you, you know, we have people working in the city making decisions about all of these communities that are impoverished, black communities in particular, and they have not set one foot in the area, do not know anything about the area, but they're making powerful decisions about investment, and a lot of this comes from some of those departments. So I just wanted to add that one piece, and that's the piece that can also help to change things. They have to go there physically and talk to the people and see the grounds that they are talking about, and that's one of the biggest problems that I see.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, for standing here with us. Just to follow up on our earlier conversation, I just wanted to make sure that anybody watching and my colleagues are clear that the ARPA money for housing, which I'm appreciative of, it is filling a lot of gaps of projects that weren't completed because we didn't have money before. Sure. So I have some coming in my district, so and so does my colleague. So we're, you know, that's, I think, a good thing, but I think that we have to acknowledge that that is totally not enough. And I agree with the fact that we have, you know, that's a major commitment, but it's just not enough. So that the money that's outlined and recommended in the 30-day memo is really above and beyond the $100 million. And so I just wanted to make sure that, you know, everybody was you know, because to me, this is like my big number one issue, because I think it is part of our crime fight. It absolutely goes with what my colleagues were just talking about in terms of that major investment. So I do hope that, you know, we're actually going to get further there. So my question then is, with the memo and the work group, what's the reporting that you'll be doing to us? I mean, we do have a hearing that my colleague will be scheduling at some point that we might be able to make recurring, that we can then get feedback on how the 30-day memo is, you know, those recommendations are being implemented. But what is that accountability? How are we able to see what's actually happening? I mean, I know I ask all the questions all the time and I can get feedback, but is there going to be a dashboard? Is there going to be a reporting to us in a more formal way other than our hearing? Like what, because we need that accountability to show, you know, exactly where the investments are taking place, you know, all of the systems that are being changed, again, which I'm thrilled about because I think that's important.
Yeah, sure. No, I completely agree. And what I'll say is that we've committed to providing updates online and open to the public. And in addition to that, so dashboarding, yes. In addition to that, I'm happy to work with you and your colleagues, whether it's a reoccurring hearing or a report that you would want to see that provides more detail. So happy to work with you.
Okay. Thank you. That was it for me, Mr. Chair, for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Shorter, can you talk a little bit about you mentioned in your opening presentation procurement stat, I think? Or
I did.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that?
It is, we are in the middle of a transformation, i.e. Workday, where we are migrating the procurement systems, technology systems into Workday. That process and what we are hearing right now, well, I'll say it this way. We're going to be working with Chief Brown. OPI has already reached out to find and develop ways to better support the Bureau And what that means is reoccurring in the same way we do with other agencies, reoccurring sessions where we talk about pain points and how we can, as an administration, support the staff. Those meetings have not started yet. OPI is still working with Chief Brown to define what exactly the parameters will be. And so what I will say is that it will look a lot like the late invoice sessions look today, where a combination of agencies that are impacted are calling in. We're looking at a dashboard, and we are having conversations about clear challenges in the business process or challenges in terms of bottlenecks. But again, it is still in development, and the Office of Performance and Innovation is working with the Procurement Bureau to define it.
Got it. Thank you. And one last question on my end. So we had alluded to the authority that the City Council has is going to change. That goes into effect July 1st. That was based on a charter amendment that was approved by the qualified voters of the city. That'll go into effect July 1st. The first year that will impact in terms of budget is for fiscal year 2024, so this time next year. How do you see your office's, or what do you see as your office's role in a change in interactions with the council and with the committee as we, once we get done with this budget process in a couple weeks? How do you see that changing?
I think what we've heard, what I'll say is that what we have talked about and what I've seen in writing via email is that what we'll be doing directly with you and your colleagues is working after this budget season is complete, that I will directly, and my office will be directly working with you to make sure that we are facilitating a better conversation with agencies around any commitments around action that come from this budget season, to make sure that information is flowing and is flowing clearly. So regular meetings to provide status updates for the FY2023 budget is something that we've already talked about, and then I'll be working with the Chief of Staff and MOGR to help facilitate. In terms of FY24, I'll work with the same group, the Chief of Staff and MOGR, to ultimately determine how we will engage. My hope is that that engagement happens throughout the year, and that as we start talking about fulfilling commitments for 23, we are also talking about 24 in the budget development process for 24. This process actually is, other councils, mayors and councils have already done this in the other places, so this is doable. I'm very optimistic about what we can do to make sure that we are all on the same page and that we deliver an FY24 budget that everyone feels good about and that leads the city in the right, funds the city to do the right things. So I hope to be a part of that process early in the year with budget and finance at the table as well.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear that, and look forward to sitting down with you and your team, hopefully, end of the month, beginning of July, to start to hash out what that looks like. And I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with me. I'm optimistic every year coming into this process. With that, colleagues, any other questions for CAO Shorter? Mr. Shorter, Madam Deputy CAO, thank you very much for your service and your time.